Hello. Hi there. Um, my name is Jay Dragon, and I'm handling this panel about designing outside the line. We are handling this four. Oh, I'm getting a little echo right away, Riley. I think that's you find headphones.
It's the
Anyway.
Twitch stream.
No, it's fixed.
Oh, word. Yeah. Okay. Word. We are four designers with a ton of different backgrounds in various forms of design. We're approaching Belonging Outside Belonging, which is a game engine that was designed by Avery Alder and Benjamin Rosenbaum. I believe the book came out in 2018, late 2018, I think is correct. And we've all done sort of a lot of different work with it, and we're interested today in talking about it, talking about what it means, why it's such a hotbed for marginalized designers, and ultimately sort of like the way in which we view it as influential and influencing. So if folks want to introduce themselves, Brandon, you want to just introduce yourself and a little bit about your background with BoB?
Hi everyone. My name is Brandon O'Brien. I'm a speculative fiction writer, poet, and game designer from Trinidad and Tobago. My first experience with BoB was while the designer Avery Alder was my mentor during the Emerging Designers Mentorship Program while I was working on my own game. And as a result, I've spent a lot of time tinkering with Belonging Outside Belonging as a format, and I've made like a handful of games that are presently on my itch.io, the Rising Tides.itch.io.
Luke?
Hello, everyone. I'm Luke. My pronouns are they, them. I am a game designer and a former professional GM for children. I got my start with BoB some years ago now with like the original version of Dream Askew before like BoB per se existed. And it was actually the basis for like the first game I ever designed and published. And then since then, I have gone on to design and publish several other games using the kind of framework of BoB.
Riley?
Hi, I'm Riley Rethal. I am a pharmacy student / game designer. Wow, I haven't thought about game design, so I mean I have, but also it's weird to talk about. What are games? I have about a little less than a year ago. I was on a podcast and I said that I could never write a Belonging Outside Belonging game, and then recently after that, I decided that I was wrong and I wrote one, and then I wrote another one, and I'm working on a couple more that are like less based on the original BoB design, and yeah.
Yeah, and I'm Jay Dragon. I am a game designer and publisher. I have written a lot of BoB games in whether or not I call them that. My two big ones are Sleepaway and Wander Home, which some of you might have heard of. I also have released a number of different ones, including Dungeon, and then a few on my Patreon of various forms. I also want to give a big shout out to Jamila Najati, who isn't able to make it to the stream, but they are a really incredible BoB designer, and they have a ton of really informative thoughts, and their work, including Balik Bayan, and oh my goodness, how did I forgot the other one that I really love. The one's tarot cards. I just completely blanked. Yeah, Oathbreakers. Oathbreakers are both really influential BoB-esque games, and I really encourage you to check them out. And with
shout out to Jammy. We love and respect
shout out
Jammy.
to Jammy. I was so heartbroken when they couldn't make it to this panel, but their work is absolutely astounding. So I figured maybe a good place to start is with I kind of want to start with Dream Askew and Dream Apart, because for folks who don't know, the BoB system kind of came out of Dream Askew and Dream Apart by Avery Alder and Benjamin Rosenbaum. And Brandon, I figure you might have a bit more insight into this. Geez. You might have a bit more insight into this than most people do. But I was wondering if I could get your. I'm interested in everyone's thoughts on what sort of like, what do you kind of view as like the core of BoB? What do you sort of view as happening within Dream Askew and Dream Apart, and what do you think sort of is the like if you were going to summarize it to someone who'd never encountered it before, and sort of like what Dream Askew and Dream Apart is doing, how would you do so? I'm between worlds. Ah, jeez.
Well, I feel like one of the easiest and kind of neatest ways to describe BoB is the tagline that Avery gave Dream Askew, which is "No dice, no masters," which I think is like radical in a whole lot of ways, but like the framing of belonging outside belonging is essentially giving characters opportunities to um, engage with each other and draw on each individual character's abilities to create and resolve conflict through each other. It borrows a great deal from Powered by the Apocalypse games. As a result, I imagine there's a lot of uh, thoroughfare there, if that makes sense, in terms of giving character interactions the power to um, generate conflict without needing to always rely on dice for an element of randomness. And instead, you're just empowered to thoroughly perform your character, thoroughly perform the relationship your character has with the world that you're presently in, and see how that generates story from there, which I think is really neat.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think, yeah, Riley, I think you're back.
Okay.
Oh, you're back.
Better? I'm afraid that I picked it up yesterday trying to get out of a school thing.
No, you seem to be working.
You're good.
The best possible reason to mess it up, honestly.
For sure. We are do crimes. What do you call? Yeah, Brandon, I big agree with you. I think also, I feel like, I don't know. I'm curious about anyone else's thoughts on this, but I really feel like BoB is sort of the first system engine I've seen that really takes a stance on like what the kind of stories it tells are. Like, I feel like like PBTA certainly like has opinions on what a game is like and what a gameplay loop is like. But I feel like BoB is sort of really takes a hard line on these are games about community and finding meaning outside community. And I don't know. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I feel strongly enough about it that I don't want to claim sole credit. I was certainly one of the people who kind of stubbornly put my foot down and insisted in the early days that belonging outside belonging and no dice, no masters were like different things that referred to different kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
And made that distinction between like, yeah, the politics of belonging outside belonging and the kinds of stories that it is interested in telling on the one hand, and then just like the idea of like distributing a setting into setting elements and like having tokens and like the mechanical trappings of it all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think the politics of Dream Askew and Dream Apart and the clarity of them is really interesting, and especially the way that like, unlike I think a lot of like nominally, and this is no real surprise given the relationship between Dream Askew and Apocalypse World, like nominally Apocalypse World is also about like a marginalized community in a space that is like uncertain and fraught and around whom there is like badness and danger. Like it's nominally the same thing. The difference is that Dream Askew like makes very clear and explicit like what that marginalized community is and how that specific marginalization matters. And I think that specificity, because Dream Apart does the same thing, I think that specificity was a really new thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
Mm-hmm. No.
Right. Yeah, I'm thinking about it because like I've definitely because like Venture and Galactic are both very much taking things that already exist as tropes and like putting them into the belonging outside belonging format, which I think was kind of an interesting thing to do because it was basically like taking D&D and Star Wars respectively, and being like, okay, but what if this was about like a marginalized community that was, like creating community with each other, especially Galactic, I think, was about being like, okay, Star Wars is like okay, but what if like the resistance was an actual like resistance movement? So I think that framework has been a way to kind of like take something that could be any game and be like, no, this is about belonging outside belonging now. My city now.
Because I think what stands out when it comes to BoB compared to other things that borrow the things that make it work mechanically, or that it borrows those mechanics from, is that whereas, say, Apocalypse World is concerned primarily with a genre, you could look at it and okay, this is the genre of game I'm playing, essentially. BoB is more concerned with um, what can only be described in my head in words as fanfic, which is the fanfic of not caring primarily about genre and caring primarily about the interactions between people and how they sustain their individual space, where all of the questions are primarily about your relationship to yourself and your relationship to the place around you, and not necessarily always how you get to do cool things, or what cool things mean to you. It's always a matter of what does your relationship to this space mean to you. How are you giving to this space? What is this space giving to you? What does this space ask of you? And I think those are interesting questions to ask.
Yeah, and I feel like fan fiction is such an amazing comparison there, both because I think certainly like I think in all of our own ways, our design and like our design philosophies are influenced by stories and like the act of telling stories and what that means. But I'm also really struck by fan fiction specifically because, at least to me, it's a very queer art form and a very queer way of relating to like storytelling and like finding meaning in stories. And I wonder, sort of, what is it to you about? Like, do you think that BoB kind of lends itself more easily, or is that just kind of the language that it speaks? In terms of like, yeah, like in terms of like, do you think it lends itself more comfortably to that kind of like focus on characters because of something like intrinsic in the way the design is, or do you think that's because like, or do you think that's because of like the audience, the people who value it?
Well, I do think that it is intrinsic,
Mm-hmm.
in the sense that um, like the moves that you make are always in relation to, or almost always in relation to an interaction that you're having with another person,
Mm-hmm.
which means that you are encouraged as a result to interact, not simply to do a thing, not simply to resolve something. You're
Mm-hmm.
doing this in relationship to somebody else, in relationship to a moment that you're sharing with somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and especially the like the comparison that I make with fanfic as uh, uh, in this way is very much about not just the fact that we are now valuing those emotional moments, but we are valuing them because they resolve things about the way that we see this community or these groups of people in ways that you can't get when we're worrying about plot, if that makes sense. When you're always worrying about attempting to accomplish a thing, um, often that gets in the way of what that thing means for people and how those people might have conflicts about those meanings. Um, Not all the time. Good story. But yeah, like I appreciate the fact that it gives you an opportunity to draw out a moment and think about how two characters or a group of characters feel about um, their relationship to that moment, um, and give them an opportunity to trade kinds of opportunities off of that moment in order to generate drama. Um, because then the story is not always about did they win or did they lose this thing, but how does everybody feel? What has everybody gained? What has everybody lost?
Yeah, unsurprising anybody, I'm gonna put my my anthropologist hat on and say I think it's both. You know, I think it is both a matter of like Avery and Ben really clearly communicated and like curated an audience, and then a lot of the people building on that were people who had been interested in that in the first place, and so have further gone on to push in that direction. And so, like, on the one hand, I think it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. But yeah, no, I think on the other hand, there definitely are some mechanical, like, things about BoB that do push it in that direction. Like, even just the almost like conceptual weight. Because when you hack a game, there is always some degree of like inertia built in that tends you towards replicating like all of the structures of it. And discarding a bit is like a more active decision than, oh, well, like Dream Askew has a so-and-so, so I guess I should have one too. And so even just like the existence of the community worksheet and the fact that like by default, if you hack a BoB game, you're probably going to be inclined to like make some kind of equivalent to one. Like even just that simple fact means that the game does tend towards that focus. And I think also there is something about the distribution of setting elements and the idea of parceling out a world into pieces that everyone gets equal stake in, that no one owns in a like ongoing sense, and which are also in dialogue with one another. I think something about that player dynamic sets people up more for stories about like being in community and like communicating than having like a GM.
Oh, Riley, never mind. Sorry, I thought you were muted for a second, but I just zoned out.
Sorry, with my audio, who knows at this point. As the number one fan of Ask Left questions, I think that like a huge thing that drew me towards BoB is the fact that like I mean I guess like in a more general sense, I really like I only play games where like everyone has an equal stake and stuff, because I cannot handle anyone like having secrets or being like the GM role. But more specifically, a thing that I really like about BoB is that like you have like the way that I guess moves also do, but it's like, you know, I like ask left questions more, is you get to kind of give a player something. Like you get to give them this like leading question or like a prompt, and then you get to say like, this is the thing that I want you to feel about me. Why do you feel that way? And so like it's this really cool like dynamic that I think is it's like probably my favorite thing in games. Now that I'm thinking about it in that general way. And I think it creates like a really cool way that like the relationships between characters exist almost as much as the characters do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, kind of learning the importance of those questions and like the way in which the game kind of the value it finds in specificity and simplicity kind of was a really important part of learning how to design for it. What do you think was sort of your like, you know, we've all done a lot of work with BoB, and so what I'm curious about is what were sort of the things you learned, not even in like this is like you think a universal maxim, but just like as you design BoB games, you know, you design your first one. I feel like for me at least, it felt like I was like, I didn't know what to keep, what to cut, what mattered to me, what didn't, what should I be taking away from Dream Askew and Dream Apart. And I feel like as I've designed, I've learned more and more like the language of it. What do you think you've learned sort of along the way? Like what pieces have you learned that you value or that you want to that you put aside in your own designs? And like how do you use things that way?
Strong and weak moves can go in the trash.
Did you say the opposite thing like 6 months ago.
No. Here's the thing. Like, the idea that the binary of moves that you should be, like, dividing is, here are my strong moves and here are my weak moves. I'm just like, nah. Like, we're not about that life over in Australia down here. Like, one of the very first things that I look at when I'm designing a BoB game nowadays is I'm like, okay, like, thematically, what is this game about? And, like, what actually do my, like, give agency, like, spend a token moves look like? And what actually do my, like, introduce trouble, like, get a token moves? Like, what are those actually? They're not just strong and weak. Like, there's got to be something that is more compelling and more specific and more fictional than that.
See, I was going to say that in my first game, I got rid of regular moves. In the future, I'm planning on getting rid of all moves. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. No dice, no masters, no moves. Yep, that's it.
Yeah, let me just make a note in the dream about design doc, Riley.
Yeah, actually, me and Luke are working on a game that does not have moves in the same way. It just has, like, questions and stuff. And then I'm also working on another game, sort of, which does actually have moves, but it just has one kind of move. And there's, like, all, like, the strong ones and the weak ones, they're all the same. They all require you to spend something, because it's a game about, like, grief tragedy. So you're, like, weak moves are about not having agency, and then your strong moves are about having agency, whether that's to do a good thing or a very dumb thing.
Very nice. See, so my thought might sound like I totally disagree with you, even though I think all of your everything that you just said was actually really rad. But I actually have more moves on average in my BoB games because I'm particularly fond of what I like kind of very weakly refer to as group moves, where two or more people can choose to create a conflict, and it will operate the same way as gaining a token singularly for everybody who creates that conflict. So not only does everybody gain more opportunities for agency later on, but it means that everybody gets to agree about what a conflict means and does, instead of somebody just doing something and everybody must now decide a way to respond. Everybody gets not only a mechanical like justification for entering in this conflict, but they get to dramatically frame what it is. So like in like my first BoB game did not resemble a BoB didn't resemble a BoB game at all, because all of the very meticulous options that would have existed in a game like Askew, where you get to look at a character sheet and determine all of the things that matter to you. I initially made that game by saying, you know what, you just figure it out, just know that these things exist. But what was absolutely important to me was, if two people agreed to get in a fight and storm off on each other, each of them get a token. Because that was something that they agreed on. That was something that they both value. And resolving that together, or having another character resolve that, would also be interesting as well. Like giving people opportunities to play off each other as groups, I thought was really radical.
I love that so much. I think one interesting thing that, not to answer my, to answer my own question. An interesting thing that I learned just from BoB is the way, like, I feel like so many different designers can come to just fundamentally different conclusions about like what parts of it that you need and like matter to you. So for example, I tend to toss out tips. Like I just don't use them in my design anymore. I just haven't practiced with them. When Riley and I were talking about Venture, she was like, I don't need regular moves. I'm cutting those entirely. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, they're not actually doing anything. They don't have a meta currency involved. And then went back to Askew and I found the regular move offer someone a cigarette, which I love because it's there's no mechanical advantage to it. There's no token exchange. There's just the narrative, like the fact that the text gives you permission to at any time offer someone a cigarette, and that's just, I feel like, I don't know, like that was just a moment for me where I was like, oh, I could write a whole game around a mechanic that's just about offering someone else a cigarette. And I did.
And it's a great fucking game.
It's a good game, yeah.
I just want to say, I think the other thing I want to call out as a part of BoB that, is, no, this is not me saying that another part of BoB is optional and should be thrown in the trash. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna bring it back. I'm gonna be a bit more reasonable. And this is actually... Is
this a coward stream? Are we on a coward panel right now?
and Jay, you're actually responsible for this. Mm-hmm. It's your fault. I think increasingly, I think there is a lot of potential in BoB games doing more with the token economy. And by that, I don't mean necessarily let's make it complicated and try and recreate the density of Dungeons and Dragons, but in BoB. That seems like a terrible idea. Please don't do that.
I feel like you could maybe do something cool with it, but carry on.
But what I mean is, Jay, in the Nameless engine, the way that where tokens live and what it means for tokens to be attached to an object and the ways that they move around the table, I think is really interesting. And so my current BoB project is a game called Harvest, and it's a folk horror game. And so in that, there are tokens that are attached to the island you live on, and that's where tokens are put and come back from. But then there's a way that they go out of the game in one direction on a character sheet, and there's a way that they go out of the game in another direction over there, and those things trigger fictional events. And it's looking at the ways that the architecture of the token economy can be made a scaffold that you can string a bunch of juicy fiction on, I think is a direction that we are starting to move in BoB. And I think there's a lot of potential in that direction.
So I'm going to finish it, but I've had a game in my head for a year based on Black Sails, where the whole thing is you get tokens and you trade tokens, but also the setting elements get tokens, and kind of act as institutions that can antagonize and help different characters. So, and also token clock. You got to get a certain number of tokens to do a thing.
Yeah, no, I'm there with you, and I feel also I feel one of the coolest things about learning BoB is learning I don't know, I've said this before, but I feel one of the things that's really taught me is the capacity to go very specific, or very the value of specificity, and when you are specific and when you are vague. Certainly I think a lot about pick lists and the mechanical importance of pick lists as rules. But then also I just think about, when the difference between a move between offer someone a cigarette versus offer someone something, or offer a friend something, or offer a friend a cigarette, right? Those are all different moves that have very different mechanical weight based on their consistency, based on their specificity. And I think that's a big lesson I took away from BoB. Do you feel that kind of relationship with do you feel there's any aspects of BoB that have sort of in that way permeated and influenced your design work outside of the engine? Do you think there's tools there you've learned that have started showing up in other things you work on, or at least in the way you think about games?
Okay. No one else has an immediate thought, so I'm gonna give my thought. Yeah, I think definitely, especially because for me there is a very clear trajectory, I think, in my design influence, where Apocalypse World was my first indie game that I ever played. It was hugely influential on me. PBTA, my primary design language that I'm fluent in is powered by the Apocalypse. But I'm multilingual because I then also learned to speak BoB. And I think both of those, and BoB even more so than Apocalypse World, make like the specific words that you use to describe a thing, like those are mechanical and like really matter. And I think, yeah, getting progressing from like, oh, here I am like fiddling with my move triggers to like the move is only trigger. There is only trigger. That's the whole extent of the move. And like you have to like make it say exactly what you mean and exactly what you want it to say, because like that's all you fucking get. I think it has been really, really helpful to me to like hone in and like, yeah, learn, as you say, Jay, this balance of the like telescoping lens between like when you want to be evocative and broad and when you want to be like laser specific. And I think I've now like bring that to all of my design work, and it's made me even more of a like annoying perfectionist when people use words like red, and I'm like, okay, but this red, it's not very expressive. Like, what can we do? We need to do more with this color.
For quick context, Luke is one of the editors involved on Wander Home, and Wander Home has, I think at my last count, around between 400 and 500 pick lists. And Luke went over, Luke's job was literally to go over all of them with a fine-tooth comb and just get nitpicky about the wording.
Jay, red just isn't doing any work here.
I know it's not, it needs more juice. Anyway, what about everyone else's?
Yeah, no, how long did we spend trying to come up with playbook names for
Yeah. Jack.
No, like 100% Riley, right? Like, there was a whole, like, half-hour discussion about just, like, the specific idiomatic, like, implication we wanted one to have. The late arrival, I think, in the end, is what we settled on, which, like, for a recently dead person, mwah. That one goes out to you, Brandon. I know you appreciate that shit.
I do. Wow, thank you very much. So I think I'm not sure how effectively this answers this question, but I think one of the things that I value most in my own design as a result of BoB is asking a lot of questions. Like, never get fed up of asking questions. Like, the true value of the No Masters part of No Dice, No Masters is giving players an opportunity to shape the world at every possible instance that they can get. If you're not leaving something to chance, it's because that is the thing that matters to the world that you're trying to evoke. But if that can be left up to a player, by all means ask players, and ask as many players as possible at once to be able to frame that. One of the big beauties of Dream Askew and Dream Apart is the ability to draw a map, because it means you not only get the opportunity to like decide what is here, they are, and like how you're physically related to those things. And I think giving players as many opportunities to do those things in another game will always be much cooler. Like there is no game that does not benefit from, even if unfortunately your game does have a GM. There's nothing lost by that GM going, you open the door, what do you find on the other side of that door? What is your relationship to the thing on the other side of that door? Because if players already have things that they're attached to for their characters, giving them opportunities to invoke them themselves and be prepared to interact with those things themselves will never not be cool.
I also want to take a quick moment and just shout out someone in chat, LXNR Hinners, who just said, BoB is just a web of lyric games. Each move is its own lyric game. And I don't want to dwell on that too much, partially because I've just been on 2 panels where like that was kind of the theme of it. In one form or another. But I do want to just acknowledge that it's a kick-ass concept.
It is.
Yeah, just I feel like I don't know, personally, that is what part of what heavily informs my design is like the prosaic value and like needing to like, I don't know, like the poetic language of BoB. Like I definitely remember in Sleepaway, there was a moment when I realized that a move was that it was possible for moves to be unbalanced, for there to be like power imbalances among the moves. And that was a moment for me where I was like, oh my god, because it's just based on word choice, right? Like the difference between like, like a move that like, basically like sort of what the move is specific about or what it's general about. It's like, oh no, this pros a game design question. Yeah.
Writing a
just want
BoB
to say-
game.
Oh,
Brandon, please.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say idly that as a poet, like this distinction is always intensely valuable to me because I love words. I love people's ability to interact with words, and as a result, some of the best singular interactions that I've gotten from some of the BoB games that I really, really enjoy, like some of Jamie's work, is when a move allows me to be interpretive about what I'm supposed to value in this moment.
Mm-hmm.
Because it means that I'm not following rules. I'm just genuinely having an interaction with another person.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really cool.
Yeah, no, I was literally gonna say, like, writing BoB games is like writing poetry. Like, it is very much like the same skill set. I also just want to very briefly, my other pithier answer to the question you asked, Jay, is I owe my entire design career to BoB games, because if Askew did not exist, then I would never have designed and published the first game I did. So it's all Avery's fault. Basically, if you dislike my work, go and complain to Avery about it. It's her fault.
I think the last question I want to ask all of you before we get to audience questions is, to me, at least from my perspective, BoB has been hugely influential, or at least these two things have correlated heavily, and perhaps they've influenced each other. But BoB and the itch explosion, the itch.io explosion, feels very heavily correlated to me in terms of like, I remember certainly sort of I came in right after Sad Mech Jam, but there was a BoB jam that, oh god, Brandon, were you involved in that, or am I just making that up? Am I making it up?
I've made so many BoB games. I can't remember if I did anything for the BoB.
I think you made a game for it. So I remember just looking through them all when I was like years and years and centuries.
I can confirm Brandon did indeed submit a game.
Okay, good.
That's when I made Dream of Blair, which was my very enjoyable experience of attempting to relive high school.
Yeah, it really does that good. But yeah, I feel like for me, the BoB Jam was, I think, both really influential in terms of like getting the impetus to design BoB and getting access to the PDF of the guide on how to design it before I could afford the book. But then also, I think, just sort of in terms of growing the itch community, it felt very influential. Do any of you kind of have thoughts on like the way in which sort of this enormous wave of marginalized designers and creators from from a bunch of places and with a bunch of voices that haven't normally been given access in the RPG space, like the way in which that's correlated with BoB? Do you think that like the nature of BoB has helped that, or do you think that they've helped that we've been the ones to get BoB to how do you think they tie together? Which I guess is,
if I may put on my anthropologist hat again, I think the answer is both. My substantive answer to this question is, I think BoB is very democratic as a design structure, in that it is very, very easy to access the writing of a BoB game, right? Like, if you can write a poem, and Brandon, I'm sure, will back me up here, everyone has poetry in their heart just waiting to be let out. If you can write a poem, you can write a fucking BoB game. Unlike, the further up the scale of like mechanics and fiction are separate entities and like mechanical complexity begins to exist, you go from like, there's PBTA and then there's Fortune in the Dark and then there's like, and then at various points along there's like weird indie games, but speaking in generalities, like the further up that scale you go, the more other skills you need, and the more like rigorous playtesting you quote unquote need, and the more intimidating it feels to like, you know, roll up your sleeves and like have a go designing a thing. Whereas like when the entire hack is what John Harper has called like the poetry layer hack, which is to say where you just change like the poetry part of the game, the words. When that's all the hack is, it is fundamentally really quite approachable, so long as you speak the language in question. Like you've got a really good shot at like making a cool thing. And so I think as a result, like people who, you know, like are from marginalized backgrounds, whose voices have not normally been heard, who maybe like, you know, don't have as much experience with kind of, you know, what it means to, you know, like futz about with more complicated mechanics, or who are not interested in doing that. It's very, very easy to design a BoB game if you want to design a BoB game. All you need to do is want to design a BoB game. And all of you in the audience should go out and design a BoB game. There we go.
I want you.
So like, I want to immediately follow by putting on my poetry hat, which is, I agree with Luke very obviously that if you can write a poem, you can write a BoB game. And the very weirdly radical thing that comes out of that is, at least from my experience, it isn't merely true that everybody has a poem in them. It is also true that every marginalized person has a poem in them that is very vigorously and painfully always trying to escape. There is always a conversation about the world that we live in and our attempt to survive it that is yearning for an opportunity to be said, and we will say it whenever we get that opportunity. And I think one of the beauties of BoB as a framework is it gives us an opportunity to genuinely wrestle with spaces that we either want to feel welcome in but do not feel perfectly welcome in, or are actively hostile to us. It's radical to me that Dream Askew in particular is about attempting to create a space where queer people can survive when the entire world has fallen apart, and that all of the language that exists about that world that is otherwise in players' control to actually frame is that there are still hostilities that you have not escaped. You are just in a space where some of those hostilities have been mitigated and still need to be mitigated as a result. Part of the reason why I decided to write Dream of Blair for the BoB Jam was school is terrible for some of us, but it's also the one thing that we all, for the most part, have in common as a formative element of our experience. So how do we create space when we are in a physical location that is trying to rob us of space? How do we attempt to keep that space from falling apart? And what are the consequences of that kind of work? And I think that when marginalized people in particular take that framework, they are constantly attempting to ask and answer those questions, because the benefit of giving marginalized people the opportunity to realize those questions and answers in play is the opportunity to create space in the real world and understand exactly how complicated and fraught those things often are, but know that you technically had a training session of that experience and know where to take some of those more beneficial learning experiences too.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to say there's a very gay poem inside you, and it's trying to get out is the best description of Jay's entire like design catalog that I've ever heard in my life.
I wrote Brandon's quote down in my notebook. I've just been writing quotes down in my notebook this whole time. I'm going to tweet them after this. That was one of them. I want to do a couple questions from chat real quick. So if Laura, could we get a question?
Sure thing. We have from A Fool and His Folly. What advice do you have about getting to the most effective group of moves? How do you find the moves that most effectively evoke or carry the themes and goals of the game?
To 10 points for specifying what you meant by effective, because that was going to be my first question.
Same, yeah.
Wow.
I think for me, I think it's different for every game, but I think for Wanderhome, because that's kind of the big. I've got Wanderhome on my mind. But there's for me, it was very much like, what is it important for these characters to be doing? Like, what is kind of the space I want to encourage people to be engaging in, and how do I use specificity to aid that? So one of the universal, quote unquote weak moves, things that get you a token whenever you do them, is whenever you take a moment to appreciate the grandeur of nature or something to that effect. It is a move that is about like sitting there and chilling, and you get a token, and like describing to the table what you see, and you get a token for it. But it is in no way sort of within the range of traditional models, the Dream of Askew, Dream Apart sense of what a weak move looks like. And so like that was sort of a decision that was very effective for Wanderhome. But working on Untitled 1, that's on my Patreon, or working on Dungeon with Riley, Adventure in Dungeon, like, I don't want that move anywhere near those games. So it at least anywhere near my parts. And so like those aren't, so it feels very specific to me based on what is sort of the space I want the game to take up.
Yeah, I am inclined to agree. I think the question that I've been asking myself a lot when it comes to whenever I tinker with that with BoB games is why is this person here and what are they trying to do? Which works in the kind of tropey sense of if you're trying to make a character sheet where somebody is supposed to invoke like a stock character of a certain kind of genre space, you still need to ask questions about what kinds of conflicts are natural to that character, but also in the more emotional sense. Why is anybody in the space that you have set this event in? And in the case of this individual character or these groups of characters, what are the things that will matter to them, not only for the sake of keeping that space alive or making it the kind of space that they want it to be, but like what do they want, what do they fear, what kinds of hang-ups do they have? And as you ask those questions, more often you'll find things that matter specifically to certain kinds of characters, and those things will kind of call out to you and become more important in that process.
We can take another. I don't know if anyone else has any. I don't want to cut anyone off, but we can also take another question.
I have a thought, but I also would like to hear a thought from Riley, if Riley has a thought.
Oh, Riley, you're muted. Oh, there you go. Never mind. You're good.
You're good.
Just like do things that you want the players to do. Like I think especially in Galactic, like that's it. Like especially in Galactic, I really wanted every move to be not about. Like I think there's an idea in the original like Dream Heart, Dream Askew, and other hacks that I've seen that like it's fine. It's just not the thing that I want to do. Where it'll be like, oh, strong moves are when you do like a thing that is good that your character does, and weak moves are when your character does a bad thing. And it's like I don't really care if the character is doing something. I care that like there is a wrinkle or a good thing that happens in your story. So like one of the weak moves for the ace in Galactic is say we've got company, which like it doesn't have anything to do. First, I literally invented a new mechanic which is say blank, just so I could have say we've got company in there. Important. Also, like it's about like introducing a problem to your plot. And like the diplomat, which is kind of like the Princess Leia character, has like a discover a betrayal thing, which doesn't have to do with you doing anything bad. It's like, oh, I the player am interested in having a betrayal happen right now, so that's my move.
So I will discover one. Ta-da!
Yeah. Amazing how that happens.
I had a thought, and then it's just like Riley just said a really clever thing, and it's just like it's fallen straight out of my. Oh, right. I think the key thing for me is thinking about like the more and more I design BoB games, the more and more intentionally and specifically I think about what the emotional like core and arc of each playbook is. Like what are the relational and what are the emotional themes that are core to this playbook? And I think going back to that as a touchstone is really, really helpful in honing the right set of moves. Like if this is a playbook that is defined by a kind of wistful yearning, longing for a different life, like does this move speak to that? If no, how can I make it speak to that more? If yes, how can I make it speak to that more? Because you always got to be on your bullshit. Or like maybe that we don't want to paint like a one-note painting, as Ian McKellen says. You don't want to play a whole Shakespeare speech or in just a wash of like sadness. So like what's something that will contrast interestingly with the emotional arc of this character? What's something that gives them some relief to that? So I find that really helpful.
Can we get one other question before we go to our outro?
Sure. So it's from Marin JSB. What are some interesting, surprising, or exciting ways you've seen people experiment with BoB?
Starting with people in this panel, or just like starting with people in general.
We don't have to hype each other. I want to really quickly shout out Georgie Batts, who I'm not sure of Georgie's Twitter account, but Georgie's working on a BoB game right now. I don't even know if Georgie released it, but it's a 2-player BoB game where based on Frankenstein, where one of you is the creator of another individual who is like, and you're trying to work out your like complicated codependent parent-creator relationship through a 2-player BoB game, and that is just has some really great design moments. I'm going to see if I can find it real quick while other people answer the question.
Yeah, shout the fuck out to like duet BoB games. There's a lot of room in that space. Games Drop Bear has a great one about a pair of artists, and they're gay on an island and in love, but there's tension in their relationship. Beautiful stuff.
Kazumi, who's in the chat right now, they have a game called The War and Everything that is BoB, and it uses a Jenga tower also, and it's very cool.
The War and Everything looks so good. That's like Kazumi's one game I haven't read, and I'm just gonna set aside like a couple hours at some point just to like sit with it for a bit, because I know it's gonna hit different.
Yeah, I want to shout out Jammy because they're not here with us, and also because they're a genius. I think a great innovation that like has been a thread I think through all of like Jammy's BoB games, and that I think has proliferated out in really interesting ways, is the idea of like bringing in more formal like quote unquote plot structures into BoB, like Balik Bayan and its like ways of tracking like our progress towards either like emancipation or like falling back in the hands of the corporations, the way that like Oathbreakers builds to a finale. A lot of Jammy's BoB games have this like these like meta structures in the fiction that also kind of have their own playbooks and are given agency in like a weird kind of way. And I just think that's like such an interesting and exciting innovation that I am currently riffing on. And so thank you, Jammy.
Everything about Jammy's games is so good. I've also personally been thinking a lot about Apocalypse Keys, which takes BoB token meta currency and integrates it with PBTA, where whenever you do a move, you bet with the tokens you've earned. And I love it. It's good. That's all I got. It's really good.
Everyone go out and buy one of Jammy's games.
Go out and buy, yeah. Please support Jammy. They couldn't make it here, and they were so worried, and like they felt bad about it because they wanted to be here. And please support our friend. That is all. And speaking of supporting our work, I don't know, Brendan, do you have any thoughts on that, or do you want to shift over to outros?
No, I was literally spending this time thinking about which of Jammy's games I wanted to shout out. And, so like, yeah.
This has big, like at the end of a video essay when they're like sponsored by Audible, like that same energy.
Use the code BoB.
Check out. Oh God.
Bob games make you feel really good. And speaking of people who make you feel really good, today's panel is brought to you by our friend Jen.
God, yes. So I think with that, let's transition out to more general. We have 5 minutes. So really quick, just like one sentence or so. Does anyone have any like last little bit of like cryptic wisdom or just general thoughts on BoB that you wanted to say that didn't get the chance to?
BoB, but people were talking earlier about putting on hats. And I found my brother just has this from psychology. And so I wanted to put this on as like a hat.
Your wrinkly braid hat. Give us your wrinkly braid thoughts.
Bullying outside bullying is good. Thanks.
You heard it here from the wrinkly brain folks. It must be true.
Yeah.
Big brain said it. I think my the one thing that I didn't get a chance to say, just putting my Maverick hat back on, is setting elements. They're optional.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And by optional, we also mean that you can have more than one of those things as well. You can have lots of those things as well.
I just
one
had
of those
design
elements could be a robot.
I just had to design fucking 18 of them. Like,
oh wow!
My next game's not going to have any.
Luke, 18 setting elements. I can't imagine what it's like to have a multiple of 6 that is also an absurd number of setting elements. I think my cryptic piece of advice is that, I think, and building on what Brandon just said, that everything in BoB is for you to tinker with, right? Like, I joke sometimes that Avery Alder made a very simple system so that we could like I think Avery Alder knew that there was a ton of design space that she was leaving untapped, and like I feel like it's there's so much there to explore and mess around with, and I feel like everyone's only just started picking at it, and you can do truly whatever you want with that, and I encourage you to build new things from the core that Avery Alder created. Where can we go? Oh yeah, go for it.
There was a way that I wanted. Sorry. Though I was just gonna say very quickly that there was a way that I wanted to phrase that exact same thought, which was, if BoB is a poem, you do not need to write to form. You can write free verse if you want.
God, yes.
Fucking cryptic wisdom right there. Let's go.
Obsessed, absolutely. Really quick, we have 2 minutes left, so everyone, where can we find you? Where can lovely viewers at home find you?
You can find
Laura
me.
is already dropping links. Thank you. Thank you, Laura.
You can find me on Twitter at Wildwoods Games. You can find me on Itch at Games from the Wildwood. If you like Bob games, check out Granglin Y'all. It's very gay and very Victorian, and there's gay vampires in it.
Mm-hmm.
You can find me on Twitter at The Rising Tides. You can find me on itch.io at The Rising Tides. I have maybe 3 BoB games there, but I also have some other really interesting things. There's a game there called The Refraction, where if you like to write poetry, it gives you an excuse to write a lot of poetry with your friends.
You can find me on Twitter at JSADX, that's JACEADDAX. It's also in the chat. And you can find my games at metagames.itch.io. I have Adventure and also Dungeon with Jay, which is a duo of games about D&D sort of, but better. And then also Galactic, which is about Star Wars. Those are the BoB ones.
You can find me on Twitter at JDragsky. I'm the only JDragon on Twitter, I promise you. You can also find me on Patreon at once again JDragon. You can find me on Itch at possumcreekgames.itch.io. And I'm just all over the internet everywhere. You can also follow Possum Creek, which is my publishing company, working on expanding out into new designers and releasing more BoB style games. Including, with a couple of things I can't announce yet, but you can find us at possum_creek, or someone on Instagram.
That was a great outro speed run. Everyone, good job. That was good energy.
Any percent run. I feel like I'm forgetting. I'm always forgetting a link. I always feel like I'm forgetting a link. Back Wanderhome's done. I don't have to tell you to back Wanderhome anymore. I'm
It was
sorry.
like
We should
it
still
was like-
talk about Wonder Home.
it was frenetic in the right way, you know? Like
Also, I'm sorry for the lighting. The sun is just setting, and so I'm slowly entering into like this like
no, it's incredible.
red tinted sleepover mode.
It's incredible.
And we never saw Jay again.
Also, everyone on this panel is a stretch goal contributor to Wander Home.
Oh shit, yeah. Right.
Wander Home is so is Jamie. Wander Home is a pastoral fantasy RPG set using BoB that you can pre-order right now. Go to tinyurl.com/wanderhomepg for more good Wander Home related things, and also to get playbooks and buy all our lovely friends. Thank you so much. I think that's everything. Good night, everyone. Take care. And have a happy Metatopia and have a happy November.